My name is Nadia Van Adder, and I'm the Assistant Director down at the Crystal Judson Family Justice Center. And I just want to say thank you all for taking time out of your day to learn more about domestic violence. October is DV Action Month, and the reality is if we ourselves haven't experienced it, we know someone who is. And so I really appreciate, again, you guys just taking time to learn more about this. So to start with, I want to go over terminology a little bit, just so everybody's on the same page. Domestic violence in Washington is defined really broadly as something that can happen not just with intimate partners, which is a dating relationship or spouse, but also is something that can happen with roommates and family members. Our focus at the Family Justice Center is that intimate partner violence piece. So I may interchange the terms IPV or DV, but I'm really focused on that dating relationship or spouse. But just because it's a little shorter to say, I oftentimes just say domestic violence or DV. I tend to use the term survivor when I'm presenting. Some folks use the term victim, some folks interchange them. If I interchange them, meaning the same thing, usually folks in the social service realm tend to use the term survivor, and folks connected to the system use the term victim. But for the purpose of this, if I interchange them, it's not a big deal. And then same thing with abuser or perpetrator or harm doer. Oftentimes folks in the system are going to use the term perpetrator or defendant. Folks in the social service realm are going to use abuser or harm doer. But again, if I'm interchanging them, not a big deal. It's really important that we're learning about domestic violence, because when we normally think of domestic violence, we're really thinking of just the tip of the iceberg. We're thinking about those things that we can see, right? A black eye, a broken nose, some other type of mark. But the majority of abusive behavior on the part of the harm doer or the perpetrator keeps them in a position of power over the survivor. And the majority of abusive behavior is not considered illegal. Rather, it systematically breaks down the survivor's control over their daily lives and makes them reliant on the abuser or harm doer. When I do this presentation, I really like to show this picture because I think it's a really good visual, right? What we see is just that tiny part, versus when I'm talking about domestic violence, I'm talking about this entire iceberg, most of which is going to be under the waterline, because again, those behaviors are ones that we don't necessarily see or don't necessarily consider illegal. Domestic violence is really prevalent. Nearly 1 in 4 women or 1 in 7 men experience severe physical violence. Severe is circled there because that's really looking at the tip of the iceberg, versus when we step back and take a look at that entire picture, we tend to see these numbers go up. Domestic violence is something that impacts folks regardless of so many different factors, and it happens in all communities regardless of gender identity, socioeconomic level, race, religion, ethnicity. Doesn't matter, it impacts all communities. What we see is it impacts different communities at different rates, and different communities are going to have different likelihoods of engaging in formalized services, which is why learning about domestic violence is so important and why partnerships are so important, because we know not one agency is going to capture everyone, that folks are going to engage in different portions of their life. So this is the power and control wheel and cycle of violence, and this was developed by providers back in the 70s that worked with both survivors and abusers. For the most part, it's held up. Every situation is unique. Every couple is going to have a different dynamic. But what the providers found were there were certain themes that emerged to really explain that power and control dynamic. But I'm going to start up here with emotional abuse and just kind of make my way around this wheel to explain what that looks like. What I want you to keep in mind is, again, it's about systematically isolating someone from their options and cutting them off from their resources. And what you're going to see is all of these really lean into the other. Domestic violence, it's not going to be this one isolated event. It's going to be leaning into all of these different control tactics, where again, the abuser or harm doer stays in a position of power. So emotional abuse is picking someone apart, making them think that they can't do things, and really warping their sense of self. It could be calling them names, telling them they're stupid, that thing that really changes your perception of the world and how you view yourself. Now, oftentimes I hear, if my partner called me names, I wouldn't put up with that and I would leave. But the reality is abusive behavior starts out really subtle and is going to increase over time. So when you think about emotional abuse, think about the idea of a funhouse mirror. I walk into a funhouse mirror, I look at myself, and I know I don't actually look like that, right? I look ridiculous. I go home, I look in a regular mirror, and I see what I look like. If the only mirror I saw every day was that funhouse mirror, over time, it's going to change my perception of myself and make me think that that's what I look like. And that's what that emotional abuse does, is it's not going to be this one time call someone a name. It's going to slowly increase over time. I remember working with someone one time, and I really struggled to track kind of what was going on, and I kept thinking there has to be more to this. Like maybe there's a mental health crisis or some substance use disorder, and I remember staffing it with my supervisor. And one time the client came in, and during the course of our discussion, their partner called, and their partner happened to be in law enforcement. So very clearly knew what they could and couldn't do and what was illegal. And the client said, I think I'm going crazy, and I need to know if that's what's happening. Can I just put this call on speakerphone? And so they put it on speakerphone, and their partner said, don't forget, after you drop off the kids, you're gonna go to the grocery store. And they said, yep, I'm gonna go to the grocery store. But you went to the grocery store yesterday, you're supposed to go to the library. So the client said, okay, I'll go to the library. But the books aren't due until tomorrow, you're supposed to go to the dry cleaner. And every time they agreed, the abusive partner shifted. So no wonder this client was hard to track. Their entire life was kind of ping-ponging back and forth. So again, this idea of a funhouse mirror is it really warps their sense of self and how they engage with the world. The next one up here is isolation. And isolation can happen in multiple different ways. We are in a very geographically diverse county. So it could be through maybe someone lives up in Lake Bay and their partner disables the car or says we're going to be a one-car family. If you're in Lake Bay, how do you access resources? Buses are few and far between. What happens if if every time my partner goes out to spend time with their friends, I'm blowing up their phone, I'm calling them constantly, and then they come home and I pick a fight? Eventually, they may say, it's not worth it to go out, right? It's that emotional exhaustion and what I have to do to go spend time with family or friends. But then I can say, you're the one who chose not to go spend time with your friends. You made that choice, not me. But we also see isolation happening through maybe taking someone's car keys or wallet or purse or bus pass so they can't access their community. Maybe it's physically preventing them from leaving the home or doing things to sabotage those relationships. A quick example of this isolation is a colleague of mine was at a baby shower and saw one of the folks at the baby shower wandering around the entire time on FaceTime, showing their partner to everyone that they were talking to. That was, of course, red flags. And so afterwards, the colleague goes up to the host and says, hey, I noticed this. Can you tell me a little bit about this? And their friend said, this is a friend from college. It's really hard to spend time with them because every time we go somewhere, they always are on FaceTime with their partner. So their partner is a part of every single conversation we ever have. And so it's hard to invite them to things. And we've started inviting them to less and less. Now, before I mentioned the idea that everything's going to lean into the other piece. So if you think about that emotional abuse, and maybe you have someone who's causing harm saying, your family and friends don't care about you, they don't want to spend time with you, and then they're engaging in that isolation, then they can say, see, I told you, they don't care about you. They don't want to spend time with you. So again, these things really lean into each other. The next one you've got up here is minimizing, denying, and blaming. And this is taking that abusive behavior and twisting it and putting it back on the survivor. If you didn't do X, Y, and Z, then I wouldn't have to behave this way. The abuse is really your fault. I only had to do that because you were using. If you were just a better partner, then I wouldn't have to do this. Or you're making it up, it didn't happen that way. And again, you pair this with emotional abuse, and it really changes how you view things. The next one up there is using children. And we're really looking at this in a much broader way than we did about 10 years ago. So this could include things like threatening to call the police if a survivor leaves with their kiddos and say they kidnapped them. It could be threatening to call CPS or filing false CPS reports. It could be using the family law system to try to get custody and manipulate things. A lot of clients will identify, I know what I'm willing to do to protect my kid. If I leave, they're gonna go visit the other parent. What's gonna happen if my ex escalates? Who's gonna step in and protect my kids? Is their new partner willing to step in and do what I would do to protect them if the abuse turns towards them. And so unfortunately, kids are a very powerful pawn in this. The next one up there is privilege. And this can be any form of privilege that the person causing harm can wield over the survivor. It could be in an LGBTQ relationship, threatening to out the survivor in parts of their community where they may not be out. It could be threatening, my family has access to more money or is politically connected, or I have a higher level of education. Straight couples with male abusers and female survivors, we may see it through that male privilege. It could be, I'm really well respected in our faith community. We also see language in this. Maybe the person causing harm feels more comfortable speaking in English, and the survivor, maybe English isn't their primary language. And so filing a police report could be a huge barrier. We see this through immigration status or through race. I've had survivors that say, I'm a person of color and my partner is white, and my partner will often say, go ahead and call the police. I feel comfortable interacting with them. Do you? And what you see with this use of privilege is that it's often going to be not one form, but multiple forms that are really going to be layered. The next one up there is economic abuse. And this is another one we're looking at very broadly than we used to 10 years ago. So this could be tampering with someone's ability to look at education or job training programs. It could be physically preventing them from going to work or doing things to harass them when they're at work that leads to them getting fired. It's controlling all of the money. It's maybe monitoring everything that they're spending. But we're also looking at this in a more long-term way now around things like building credit or destroying credit. If you look at trying to get into housing, one of the first things they're going to do is a credit check. What happens if your partner has sabotaged your credit or has made it so you can't build any credit? That's going to impact you getting into housing. It's going to impact getting a car. It's going to impact opening a credit card. We also see this through things around housing rights. And so maybe it could be sabotaging someone's ability to pay their rent and getting an eviction on their record. If you have bad credit and an eviction on your record, and your partner has isolated you from family and friends and you have no support network, and you look at trying to get into housing, you can get into housing, but it's going to cost you way more, right? Because of the credit and the rental history. But if they've sabotaged your ability for education or work, do you have access to those finances? If you don't have a support network that can help offset that, or maybe your support network doesn't have those finances, how do you get into those things? Then you've got coercion, threats, and intimidation. And this is things like, if you don't do this, then I'm going to escalate to physical violence. But this could also be things like breaking things around the house, kicking or punching doors or walls. This could be, if you file that family law paperwork, I'm going to disclose your substance use history to your family or to your work. Or if you don't do what I want, I'm going to release that sex tape that we made for folks to see. So it's any form of coercion or threats or intimidation. Sometimes those things are very clear and blatant to other people around them, and sometimes those behaviors are going to be more subtle. One of the things that I want to note is those examples weren't necessarily examples of physical and sexual violence. That's the overarching fear. And what I'm hoping that you're going to take away from this is really seeing that domestic violence is, again, it's a pattern of behaviors. It's not an isolated incident. When the system's looking at domestic violence, they're looking at an isolated incident. But when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about this bigger picture. And this idea of all of these pieces leaning into each other and cutting off a survivor's resources and options and systematically isolating them. Now, one of the things I often hear when I'm out in the community is, I don't understand how someone can get in that situation, right? If my partner did X, Y, and Z, I'd know and I'd be out of there. But like I mentioned with emotional abuse, domestic violence is going to start really subtle. And so this is where the cycle of violence comes in. And I want to be very clear. Abusive and coercive and controlling behavior happens through this entire process. is that there are certain points in time where it really spikes. Now, the behavior is going to start really subtle, like I said. It's going to be these low-level boundary violations, those things that kind of make you think, oh, that was weird, kind of uncomfortable, not quite sure what to do with that. But then maybe your partner says, you're overreacting, you don't have a good sense of humor, it wasn't a big deal, right? And kind of brushes it off. And these behaviors really push back our boundaries little by little as that abusive behavior vamps up and that control becomes more pervasive in all areas of life. But the cycle of violence, you can describe it as looking like a tornado, where initially it's going to take a really long time to cycle around, and over time it's going to cycle around more quickly. So you're going to have this tension building phase, which is where people will describe walking on eggshells and being very cautious of what they're saying or doing, right? That new puppy is so cute, but I'm gonna try to keep them as calm as possible and kind of out of the way because I don't want them to do something where my partner's gonna escalate. Or I'd really love to hang out, but just trying to keep everything calm so I'm not gonna engage with my community for a period of time, right? This just keeping things as calm as possible. And then there's some type of explosion. And this is where that abusive behavior spikes. And then you get a couple potential things that happen during this reconciliation phase. You could get the honeymoon phase of, I'm so sorry, it's never gonna happen again, I love you, let's go to counseling, things are gonna be better. And maybe seeing a glimpse of that person that you first cared for or fell in love with. Or you could see that minimizing, denying, and blaming. This really was on you. If you had just done this, then I wouldn't have had to respond this way. My job is really stressful. You know my boss is such a jerk. If you could just be more supportive, then I wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. And then it loops back around to that tension building phase. Now, this is called a cycle. This is not a cycle that the survivor can stop or control. It's a cycle as far as the person causing harm, what that behavior looks like, and how that abusive behavior spikes. And again, control happens through this entire process. It's that during that explosion phase is when we tend to see the things that we think of as domestic violence. Now back to this idea of, I don't know how someone can be in this situation, whereas I would just leave, right? If we go back to that thought, if you think about it like a pot of water and a frog, if you have a pot of boiling water and you put a frog in, they're not staying in. They know what's going on. If you have a pot of water and it's room temperature, that frog is fine in there, and you slowly acclimate, they're not going to know what's happening until it's too late. And again, abusive behavior is that same way, is the person causing harm is going to start with these low-level things and slowly ramp up, so that by the time we realize what's going on or better understand those behaviors, it's harder to leave. Maybe you love this person. Maybe you have connected finances. Maybe you've got kids in common. Maybe they've isolated you from family and friends so you don't feel like you have options to leave. And so it's really important that we as a community challenge that when we hear someone saying, I don't understand those things, because domestic violence, there are lots of layers to it. So these are just some basic tips when you think about supporting a survivor. And when we look at that stat of 1 in 4 women or 1 in 7 men are survivors of severe intimate partner violence in their lifetime, that means we know somebody. And if we know somebody, who else do we know? We know the person causing harm. And so it's really important that we as individuals learn about domestic violence and learn how to support someone, so that when someone we care about or that we know discloses to us, we can respond in the best way possible. The first one up there is believe them. Someone, if they disclose, if we think about the abuse that's happening, right, that verbal and emotional and isolation, they've probably heard, no one is going to believe you. And so be aware, because if someone discloses and your first response is, oh my gosh, they seemed like such an awesome partner, you've just reinforced everything that their partners told them. So if someone discloses, believe them and say that. I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this. I believe you. I'm glad you felt safe telling me this. The next one up there is to listen. Sometimes this can be hard, right? When someone tells us about a problem, oftentimes we want to problem solve and give them all the resources and tell them what to do, but it's really important to listen. Give them space to be able to disclose this and process what they need to process. let them know that there's help available. You don't have to be the expert. There are resources in the community, and let them know that there are resources. And maybe if you feel like you've got capacity, offer to help connect them in. But no, you don't have to be the resource, because there are resources out there. The next one is reassure them that the abuse is not their fault. Again, their partner has probably told them that they, for some reason, deserve this and that it's on them that they're experiencing this. As a loved one, saying, I believe you, I care about you. What is happening is not okay. It's important that we're not bad-mouthing the person that's causing harm, because that may put the survivor in the position of feeling like they have to defend them, but saying it's not okay that your partner does those things to you. That's okay to do, and that's important to do. The next one up there is let them make their own decisions. They've already had someone who's controlled everything that they've done. They know the ins and outs of their relationship better than we do. And so letting them know that there are resources and options, but respecting their ability to make their own decisions is very important. And the last one up there is just learn more about domestic violence and resources in the community. This is my professional career. This is what I do. When I know someone in my personal life that's experiencing domestic violence, I often have to go and specifically look at this slide or read the brochure as a way to remind myself that I'm in a different role and that I'm a loved one, and my job is not to tell them what to do and make decisions for them. I'm there to believe them and listen to them and offer up support when they need it. Because domestic violence includes so many different tactics, at the Family Justice Center, we structured our programs with the power and control wheel in mind to try to disrupt those different spokes. The Family Justice Center is a national model, and to be an FJC, you have to have co-location of community-based services, law enforcement, and prosecutors. Everything that happens on our criminal justice side is separate from our community side. So everything on our community side is confidential, except for the standard mandated reporting, child abuse, elder abuse, self-harm. And it's really up to survivors what they choose to engage in. We have confidential advocates to talk about safety and what's going on. Our advocates can help support clients in filing domestic violence protection orders, and we do referrals to Tacoma Pro Bono for family law support. We have support groups with our survivor well-being. We have DSHS and DCS on site multiple days a week for financial services. We do outreach based off of police reports, or we're out in the community. We have our helpline where advocates are providing basic information and help connecting into resources. And then we have some emergency stopgap care that ebbs and flows based off of funding. So this is things like diapers and wipes, toiletries, food, menstrual products, that type of thing. We've got 7 on-site partners and over 37 co-located professionals. And like I said at the beginning, we have a lot of different resources around gender-based violence in our community, and this is a snapshot of them. Our Sisters House, they have capacity to do not just intimate partner violence support, but also family members and roommate domestic violence. Their focus is really providing support to Black and African American survivors. You've got Korean Women's Association, which is a confidential DV shelter in Pierce County. They have a variety of different languages located on site. The YWCA of Pierce County, they have a shelter, they have a legal program, they have a counseling program, and a children's program. The Puyallup Tribe Community DV Advocacy Program, they work with folks regardless of whether they're a member of the tribe or not. You've got Family Renewal Shelter, which is another confidential DV shelter that works with folks that are trying to relocate out of the area. And then you've got Rebuilding Hope, the Sexual Assault Center. And they work with folks that have experienced sexual violence or trafficking. And what I will say is oftentimes our agencies are collaborating and working together. You've got the Rainbow Center. They have a crime victim advocate. And then the National Domestic Violence Hotline is a 24-hour number, and they work to connect folks into local resources. I'll open it up for questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
So could you speak about roommate and or family violence, like an adult child living with a parent?
That's not our wheelhouse, so I can kind of speak broadly about it, but we do see that a lot. And so we will, if someone calls our helpline and they identify, it's my adult child that's causing me harm and they're in the home, we'll talk with them over the phone a bit about safety. If they're trying to file a domestic violence protection order, we'll talk through what that order looks like and how they can do that and direct them to there, and then we would direct them into our sister's house for ongoing care and support. But we do see that, right? And that can be a really complicated thing. We have folks that will often identify, my adult child has a substance use disorder. And substance use and mental health crisis does not cause the domestic violence, but it can exacerbate what's already there. And then we do see it with roommates as well. So same thing, if someone calls in, we're providing them with some basic education and safety planning and support, and then we refer them to our sister's house. But that is a part of that domestic violence dynamic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yeah.
Does an abuser know that they're being abusive?
That's a great question and can be a hard one to answer. Because I am not them. I mean, domestic violence is about power and control. And so it's not an anger management issue, right? If someone has anger management issues, they have anger issues with everybody that they're interacting with, right? There's issues with people at work, with their boss, with neighbors, with friends, with family. Versus domestic violence, because it's about power and control, that person is choosing who they're harming. Most oftentimes, the people causing harm in domestic violence situations, they're not going to work and having issues with their boss or their coworkers. They're coming home, and that's who they're engaging in this abusive behavior on. I think part of the reason this is hard to answer is because it would be a better question for those that do perpetrator treatment, because I think it depends. There's different levels. You have some people that very clearly know what they're doing, and I think you have some people that were maybe really poorly socialized kind of in those developmental years, and so don't fully understand how harmful that behavior is. But I'm hesitant to fully say that they don't know what they're doing, because we often see that with minimizing, denying, and blaming of, oh, it wasn't a big deal, I didn't mean to, that type of thing. But folks who engage in those behaviors, again, they're choosing. They're not engaging like this with everybody. Oftentimes, one of the reasons it's hard for survivors to disclose is because people may see their partner as this very charismatic, wonderful person, if that answers your question. Mm-hmm.
Would the abuser, what if they've seen this growing up? Would that trickle down to the person?
It can. I think there's different studies that show different things. When folks see that growing up, that behavior tends to be really normalized. So maybe they engage in those things. But there are also people who engage in abusive behavior that didn't witness it growing up. I think that if someone is experiencing domestic violence and they've got kiddos that have witnessed it, it's important to make sure that those folks connect into care so that they're able to heal and move forward from that. But you see it in both. Like sometimes it's coming that they've seen it growing up and sometimes not. Well, I've probably gone over time, but I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to learn more about this and support folks. And if questions come up, you are welcome to reach out to us. So thank you.
Well, thank you.